Hello, I thought I would share with you today a story called My Little Brother is a Monster by Bruce Coville, and it's from Monsters, Tales to Give You the Creeps. Chapter 1, Basket Case. Thump! We both heard it. Even above the late March wind that was whipping around the house, Mom looked up from the strand of red yarn she was weaving through the warp of her big loom and said, "Go see what that was, would you, Jason?" I sighed. But it was mostly for effect. Despite the open math book in front of me, I was doing more daydreaming than figuring, so it made sense for me to go, rather than Mom to interrupt her work. However, what I saw when I opened the front door convinced me she should be interrupted after all. "Mom!" I yelled over the wind. "You'd better come here now!" She reached the front hall in time to see me carry in a big black basket. After the last few years, she's gotten pretty good at taking whatever comes along right in stride. So when she saw the baby inside, she didn't wig out. She just said, "Oh, the poor little fellow." "What makes you think it's a boy?" "Mothers know these things," she replied, reaching down to chuck the baby under the chin. While Mom fussed over the baby, I took another look at the basket. It was woven from thick, dark twigs. After a moment, I spotted a piece of coarse paper tucked next to the baby. When I pulled it out, I unfolded it and I found a note. "To whom I may concern, please take care of me baby. I cannot do it, and I want me little dumpling to have a good home. This is more important than you can guess. Thank you very much." It was signed with an X. "Better take a look at this," I said. Mom read the note and wiped away a tear as she picked up the baby. "I'm so sorry, little dumpling, but I'm glad your mother brought you here. We'll take care of you." Little dumpling puked all over her shoulder. "How do you know the note came from its mother?" I asked, as I went to fetch the paper towels. "Couldn't it have been the father?" "Mothers know these things." I was getting a little sick of that line. Mom had been using it a lot since she and Dad divorced 3 years ago. Probably I should have seen it coming when we kept the baby with us that night, but we live way out in the country, so it made sense when Mom said it was too late to take him anywhere else. I did get suspicious when she managed to get too busy the next day to contact the authorities. By the third day, I was certain. She wasn't planning on doing anything about the baby anytime soon. To tell you the truth, I wasn't sure I wanted her to. I was starting to like the little guy myself. On the other hand, I was worried that we might get into trouble. "Don't we have to go to the police?" I asked that night as we were hauling my old crib up from the basement. Mom shook her head. "I've been thinking about it, and the fact is the police will just take him to a foster home. But little dumpling's mother chose us to take care of him, so that's what we're going to do. Besides, it will be good for you to have a baby brother, and the way things look now, this is the only one you're going to get." Then she tried to tell me that sharing my room with him was a treat. What kind of treat it is, I discovered 2 weeks later, on the night of a full moon. I had gone to bed early, mostly because I had joined the baseball team. We were practicing so hard, my body felt like someone had put me inside a giant can and given me a good shaking. Little Dumpling was already sacked out in my old crib. Yes, we were still calling him Little Dumpling, or LD for short. I think that was because naming him would have made it seem like he was really ours, and Mom was still half expecting the real mother would show up and want him back. I peeked into the crib. LD's eyes were squinched shut, and he was clutching a green plastic rattle I had bought for him out of my allowance. All right, so I'm a sucker. Babies do that kind of thing to people. "Good night, Bonzo." Bonzo was my private name for him. I got it from an old movie I saw on TV one night, something starring Ronald Reagan and a chimpanzee. Bonzo was the chimp. After climbing into bed, I turned out the light on my nightstand. I listened to the soft rain pattering against the window, and the April wind rustling through the leaves on the oaks and maples that surrounded the old house we moved to after Dad left. I was asleep in seconds. When I woke, the moon was shining through the window and Little Dumpling was making a weird noise. I got out of bed to see if he was all right. When I looked in the crib, I nearly wet my pants. The baby was covered with fur. He opened his eyes and smiled at me. Fangs. I began to back towards the door. "Mom!" I called nervously. My voice didn't seem to be working. I tried again. This time it worked better than I expected. "Mom, get in there!" In seconds she was pounding through the door, pulling out her robe as she ran. "What is it, Jason? Did something happen to the baby?" Ignoring the fact that it would have been nice if she had asked if I was all right, I gasped, "Take a look at it!" She ran to the crib. "What is it?" "What do you mean, what is it?" "He's covered with fur!" She looked at me like I lost my mind. "Jason, are you all right?" Now she asked. "Of course I'm all right. Little Dumpling's the one that just turned into a monster." "Jason, come here," she said in that quiet but firm voice that signals she means business. Nervously, I joined her at the crib. LD was sleeping soundly. He was sucking his thumb and looking cute as Dickens. The only hair I could see was the brownish-black fuzz that covered his adorable little head. I rubbed my eyes. But, I stammered. "You had a bad dream, sweetheart." I shook my head. I wasn't dreaming. It was real. He was covered in fur. He had fangs. Even as I said it, I realized how stupid I sounded. For a moment I wondered if it had been a dream. But it really had happened. I was as sure of that as I was that there was no way I could convince my mother what I had seen. "Try to get back to sleep," Mom said. "You'll feel better in the morning." I considered arguing, but what would happen? She would be convinced I was nuts. I might even insist I see a shrink. And then what? If I tried to convince the doctor that my baby brother was a monster, I might end up locked in a rubber room until they could cure my delusions, as they say in the movies. I climbed back into bed, but I didn't turn out my light. I had no intention of going back to sleep. Chapter 2. Something in a Closet. In the end, sleep won. When I woke the next morning, I had a moment when I wondered if I actually had been dreaming. No, it had happened. The only thing I couldn't believe was that I had fallen back asleep afterwards. I sighed. If I had known I was going to fall asleep anyway, I would have tried to do it earlier. I was exhausted. Little Dumpling started making pick-me-up noises. We had gotten into a routine by that time. When I woke up each morning, I would haul him out of the crib, take him to the kitchen, where my mom would be making breakfast. Then I would feed him. I got a kick out of it, because he was so sloppy. He ate and liked to smear oatmeal all over his face. I wasn't sure what to expect when I went to the edge of the crib that morning, but Little Dumpling was holding out his chubby arms and looking just like his regular self. "Up! Up!" he commanded in his cute baby voice. I blinked. "When did you learn to talk?" I asked. He smiled, showing a toothy grin. It was short and square, a baby tooth, not a fang. But baby teeth don't come in overnight, at least not according to my father, who used to love to tell how miserable I made him while cutting my first tooth. Maybe this would convince my mother something weird was going on. But did I actually want to carry this kid into the kitchen? What if that cute little tooth turned into a fang once I got him close to my neck? "Up, up," he repeated urgently. "Jason," called my mother, "time for breakfast." Bring the baby into the kitchen, would you, honey? I sighed. Come on, Bonzo. I reached down to lift him up. He snuggled against me, and I felt my heart melt. Babies are dangerous that way. He talked this morning, I said as Mom fastened LD into his high chair. Actually, it was my old high chair from when I was a baby. I didn't want it, of course. Even so, it felt weird to have this kid using all of my old stuff. Don't be silly, Jason, said his mom as she tied a bib around his neck. He can't be more than 6 months old. Babies don't talk at that age. And he grew a tooth, I added, knowing that at least I could prove that much. Are you serious? Before I could stop her, she poked a finger into LD's mouth and ran it over his gums. I was terrified. If he bit her, would she turn into a monster? But after a second, she turned to me and said, What has gotten into you, Jason? There's no tooth here. But I saw it. Jason. Let me try, I said, sticking my finger into LD's mouth. He gummed me pretty hard. But there was no tooth to be found. I pulled my finger out in disgust. Ugh. LD smiled at me, a big, happy baby smile. Goo, 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 he said, blowing a spit bubble. It was too cute, but it didn't melt my heart. It sent shivers down my spine. Tired and worried, I had a hard time concentrating in school that day, and I totally screwed up baseball practice because my mind was on the baby instead of the ball. I wondered if Mom was safe home alone with that little monster. But nothing happened that day, or night, or the next, or the next. After several nearly sleepless nights, I began to wonder if I had dreamed it after all. Or maybe nothing was going to happen until the night of the full moon. That was it. It had to be. It was the moon that brought out the monster in our little foundling. Of course, I thought. Just being a monster doesn't necessarily mean that he's a menace. You can probably see what the problem was. The longer we had him, the more I was getting to like him. All right. I guess even sort of loved him. I'm only saying that because I'm trying to tell you everything straight out. It's not something I would admit if I didn't have to, but it ties into the way things worked out. Anyways, I decided that the next full moon, I would sneak the video camera into my bedroom, and I would tape record, and I would have a recording of just what happened to Little Dumpling during the night. Of course, that meant staying in the bedroom myself. I had planned to avoid that, but I figured better get this over with as soon as possible. For one thing, Little Dumpling was growing pretty fast. Not fast enough to be wildly abnormal, but fast enough that even Mom had commented on it. I wanted to settle this before he got too big. It was a weird month. About halfway through it, something began howling in the distance at night. Mom claimed it was just the neighbor's dog. I wasn't so certain. Even worse were the noises that started coming from my closet at night. I tried to tell Mom about them, but again, I could see she thought I was crazy. I started checking the door every morning to see if there were claw marks on the back of it or anything. I was never sure whether I wanted to find them or not. It would be proof that something weird was going on, but what would it mean if I did find them? I wish Dad were still with us. I did call him a couple times, but I found I wasn't able to tell him what was going on. He was nice, but I didn't feel connected to him. I didn't feel as if he could help me or save me from what was happening. By the time the next full moon came, I was a nervous wreck. Things might have gone differently that night if Mom hadn't been asked out on a date. Usually I don't mind when she goes out, though I would rather she was seeing my father, trying to get things back together. But this time, I did mind. When she asked me to keep an eye on Little Dumpling, I panicked. "You can't go out tonight," I cried. It's the full moon! Mom got mad, which doesn't happen often. Any more nonsense like that, Jason Berger, and you can forget watching Creature Feature until you're 40. This is a special evening. Delbert got these tickets weeks ago, and LD will be asleep before we leave. I just want you here in case of emergency. You've got a whole list of people to call if anything actually comes up. Right. Like Mrs. Ferguson down the road would be any help if LD actually turned into a fur-bearing fang beast. Well, at least there wouldn't be anyone around to hassle me about using the video camera. Under the circumstances, I didn't think it would be possible to fall asleep, which is why I was so astonished to find myself waking up sometime later. The full moon was shining through my window. I blinked, trying to remember what I was doing. The snorts coming from LD's crib brought everything back to me. It was monster time! I grabbed the camera and stood on the end of the bed, hoping the moon would provide enough light to show the transformation. Silently, for fear a sound might stop whatever was going on, I focused on Little Dumpling. My mouth went dry. Even though he was still asleep, fur was sprouting all over his body. At least the parts of it I could see. His ears were getting pointy. Even worse, he had to be half a foot taller. Wow. He was taller than we had put him to bed. I pressed the trigger on the camera, and a slight whir woke Little Dumpling up. He opened his eyes and blinked. He scrambled to his feet. A kid-sized monster in yellow ducky pajamas that were splitting at the seams. Grabbing the bars in the side of the crib, he began to shake them. Then he threw back his head and he howled. A cold shiver spasmed down my spine. It was time to get out of there. Before I could move, I was distracted by another set of noises. Not from the crib, but from the closet. Turning, I saw a sliver of light under the door. That was scary enough, given the fact that my closet didn't have a light in it. But when green smoke started curling under the door, I thought my heart was gonna stop. Before I could decide whether to run for it or stay, to try and protect Little Dumpling, I heard something scratching at the window. What is going on around here? Up! Up! Pleaded a voice. Up! Up! It was LD, standing in his crib, holding his furry arms. I hesitated, then I grabbed him, hoping he wouldn't sink his fangs into my neck. We gotta get out of here, Bonzo, I said as the closet door started to rattle. Out! Out! He agreed happily. I began backing towards the hall. Before I had gone 3 feet, the closet door burst open. Chapter 3. Mazrak and Kegel Farzam. I started to scream! That may not have sounded real brave and manly, but tell me what you would do if your closet door blew open and you saw a green-skinned, red-eyed, fang-mouthed monster inside. A monster bathed in green light, surrounded by billows of curling smoke. A monster who raised one enormous muscle-bound arm, pointed it right at you and said, "Give me that baby!" in a voice that sounded like rocks being smashed together. "No!" cried Little Dumpling, throwing his arms around my neck. "No, no, no, no!" Now he decided to be frightened. For an instant I hoped he might yell, "Daddy!" Then I could have let the two of them work things out on their own while I got my butt out of there. Actually, I would have gotten my butt out of there at that point if not for 3 things. 1, my legs seemed to have stopped working. 2, the monster didn't seem to be able to move out of the closet. It was straining forward as if pushing against some invisible barrier. The window blew open, and a blue monster with a long gray beard leaned through and growled, If you want to live to see the morning, follow me! Well, I knew I wanted to live to see the morning. I didn't know if following this guy was the best way to do that. Little Dumpling was no help. Furry face buried against my shoulder, he was whimpering, "No, bad, bad, bad!" But whether he was referring the first monster or the second monster, or just life in general, I had no way of telling. The monster in the closet turned to the monster in the window, and he growled, "Do not interfere, Coville." Then he turned back to me and bellowed, "Give me that child!" At the same time, he thrust his right arm into the room, and a tearing sound accompanied the action, made me think he actually had ripped through an invisible force. His hand, enormous and green, with long fingers that ended in black, razor-sharp claws, stretched toward me. When I turned to run, my bedroom door slammed shut. I grabbed the knob, turned and pulled. It wouldn't budge. No, whimpered Little Dumpling, tightening his grip on my neck. Bad. Another shedding sound. I turned. The closet monster managed to thrust its other arm into the room. Now it was leaning forward, stretching both arms towards us. "Mazrak will break through in seconds," cried the monster at the window. "If you don't want to die, come here and now!" The door still wouldn't budge. Mazrak was getting louder. Suddenly, the window didn't seem like such a bad idea, except heading for it meant I had to pass uncomfortably close to the closet. Mazrak roared and lunged for me as I passed by, but what was left of the barrier held him back. "Give me the baby," said Coville. I hesitated until Little Dumpling turned and reached toward him. I decided to trust the kid's instincts. I figured he would know more about monsters than I did, and I handed him over. The blue monster tucked Little Dumpling under his right arm. Holding the sill with his left, he swung sideways. "Climb onto my back," he growled. Another roar from the closet, more ripping. A claw brushed against my neck. Yelping with fear, I scrambled onto Coville's back, and he jumped. As we hit the ground, I heard a ferocious roar. Looking over my shoulder, I saw Mazrak's face in the window. "Run!" I screamed. "He's coming!" My shout was hardly necessary. Coville was already barreling along at a good clip, but he was handicapped by the fact that he was carrying Little Dumpling in front of him and had me clinging to his back. So when I saw Mazrak squeeze through the window and jump to the ground, I feared it wouldn't be long before he caught up with us. I had an urge to kick Coville in the side and shout, "Giddy up!" But I didn't know if that would encourage him to run faster or turn around and kill me. So I sank my fingers into his beard. His hair was as thick as my mother's yarn and held on for dear life. Soon I saw where we were heading. The cemetery. Moments later, we raced through the iron gate. The full moon caused the shadows of the tombstones to stretch ahead of us like open graves. Mazrak was only steps behind us. The sound of his voice was terrifying, though not as terrifying as knowing that if he caught up with us, I would be the first thing that he reached. I braced myself for the first swipe of his claws, but the gate, which had been rusted open for as long as I could remember, slammed shut. I had a feeling Coville did it, though I wasn't sure how. Mazrak grabbed the iron bars, howling with rage. He shook them until they burst open, whoosh, with enough time to reach one of the mausoleums, the little buildings that stood on some of the family plots. I was afraid we would be trapped if we went inside, but when we shot through the door, I saw no walls, only a thick gray mist woven through with strands of blue light. Coville continued to run. It should have taken no more than a second to cross the floor. I braced myself expecting to slam into the far wall, And 10 seconds later, we were still running. The mist was getting thicker and thicker. I heard a waterfall to our left. "Where are we going?" I cried. "To the land of always October," panted Kegelfarzum. Chapter 4. The Woven Worlds. Several minutes after we had left the mist, we entered a boggy, foresty place that looked like something out of the movies. I get to watch on Saturday nights when my mother is in a good mood. We stopped underneath a large tree. "I think we've lost him," panted Kegelfarzum. "With any luck, he won't have been able to enter that mausoleum, which will mean he'll have to go back through your closet to get home." That was good news. If Mazrak was going home wherever that was, it meant he wouldn't be waiting around to get my mother when she came back from her date. I had started to worry about that. "Get down, would you please?" said the monster, squatting so that I could get off his back. Once down, I leaned against a tree and looked around. Swampy forest stretched as far as I could see. Mist curled among the trees. A wolf or something howled in the distance. I decided that I wanted to go home myself. I wondered what the odds of that were. "Are you going to kill us?" I asked. Kegelfarzum laughed. It sounded like someone dropping rocks on a drum. "If I had wanted you to die, I would have left you in your room." That made sense. I reached up for LD. Kegelfarzum, who was about twice my height, handed the furry little monster down to me. "Why did you bring us here?" I asked. I thought of Mazrak, and he said, "Did you have someplace safer in mind?" I thought of Mazrak and shivered. "Not really, but what's going on? Who are you? Why did you save us? Did you save us? What was all that other monster? Why was he after us? What is all this about anyway?" He laughed at my barrage of questions. Then a serious look crossed his face. He ran a gnarled blue hand through his long gray beard. His broad nostrils flared, and he stuck out his jaw, causing the lower fangs to sparkle in the moonlight. "I am Kegelfarzum," he said at last, extending a blue hand. I hesitated, then put my own hand out for him to shake. "My name is Jason. Pleased to meet you, I guess. Am I pleased to meet you?" All right, I was blithering, but it was the first time I ever talked to someone who was 9 feet tall and blue. I still didn't know whether he was on our side or simply an enemy of the other monster that had been after us. "Most monsters would consider meeting me a great honor." "Why?" "I am the High Poet of Always October. I am also guardian of Dumb Pling, who is a very important child." "He is?" I asked in surprise. Then I narrowed my eyes and I added, "How did you know we called him Little Dumpling?" It was Kegelfarzum's turn to look surprised. "Dumb Pling is his name," making it 2 words, like a first and a last name. "You name your kids things like dumb?" I asked in disgust. "In the secret language of monsters, the word Bob means the sound of a large dog puking. However, that does not make us think that when you people name someone Bob, that's what you're really calling him. Here, the word dumb means prince. The baby's name translated into your language would be something along the lines of Prince Albert." I glanced at Little Dumpling. He was squishing mud between his toes and eating bugs. "Are you telling me this little monster is a prince?" "If he lives, He will one day be king of the land of Oz October, rumbled Kegelfarzum, waving a huge hairy arm around him. I followed his gesture with my eyes. Until now, I had been too distracted to notice that trees were glowing with all the colors of autumn. I shifted uneasily. Dead leaves rustled beneath my feet. The smell of fall was thick in the air. I shivered. Ooh. It had been May when we entered the cemetery. This is the land of Oz October, said Kegelfarzum, where twilight lasts for half a day, the moon is always full, and the sun is rarely seen. This is the home of the folk that you call monsters, the place that haunts your dreams at night, when you remember something frightening yet wonderful, the place you fear yet cannot stand to stay away from. Little Dumpling looked up at the huge monster. A smile creased his furry face. I was still confused. If Little Dumpling is the prince of monsters, how did he end up sleeping in my old crib? Ah, said Kegelfarzum, therein lies our problem. Come, we have a long way to go before we reach our destination. Walk with me, and I will speak to you of many things, of woven worlds and infant kings. Despite this promise, we traveled without speaking for several minutes. Kegelfarzum carried Little Dumpling. I walked beside them, except when I had to drop back because the path grew too narrow. The full moon shimmered on the murky water and silvered the mist that twisted through gnarled trunks of the great trees. Weird cries echoed in the distance. Twice we crossed paths that twisted into the darkness, looking both scary and irresistible. We walked beneath a cliff. At the top loomed a mansion. A single light shone in its tower window. Who lives up there? It depends, replied Kegelfarzum. With a shrug, it was the first question I'd asked since we began walking. I'd been waiting for him to start the story, but for some reason he seemed reluctant. After another several minutes, curiosity overcame caution, and I said, "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" A bat flew overhead. Kegelfarzum, his hand moving faster than I could see, snatched it from the air and popped it into his mouth. He chewed for a minute, then spit out the bone, all the while staring into the distance. Finally, he turned to me and said, "The land of Oz October is in danger." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely, "but what does that have to do with me?" "A great deal, if my theory is correct. With you, your world, not in the sense that it's your fault, but in the sense that you are in danger too." "What is that supposed to mean?" Kegelfarzum sighed. How long Oz October has existed is a mystery. We know neither where it came from nor how it came to be. Though our poets and magicians have many theories, my own belief is that we are a reflection of your world, that we monsters are, in some strange way, a creation of you humans. Like all reflections, we show ourselves in reverse. That means that the worst of us are formed from the dark side of truly wonderful human beings, while the best of us are reflections of people who would be called monsters in your world, no matter how they looked. He spit out another bone. Little Dumpling snatched it out of the air before it hit the ground and began to chew on it. So, we have good monsters and bad monsters, just as you have good people and bad people. And things are pretty much in balance. But something is happening here that could disturb the balance in both our world and yours. I pulled the bone away from Little Dumpling, who growled, but didn't bite. I hoisted him onto my shoulders, and he looked at the moon, and he howled. Oh! In the distance, something howled back. Oh! I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about, I said. Kegelfarzam frowned, an awesome sight given his face, and began to walk once more. I followed him, stepping around a steaming puddle. I led a group that believes monsters are humans, are part of the same family. We are opposed by a group of monsters who disagree. This group is seeking to unweave the great magic that binds our worlds together, to sever the threads that connect us. He paused and sucked his lower lip. How can I explain this? It would be as if our worlds were getting a divorce. That word made me shiver. Ugh. My parents' divorce was the worst time of my life. How can you divorce a whole world? I asked. And why would they want to do that? Kegelfarzam lifted Little Dumpling from my shoulders and hoisted him into the air, a good 12 feet above the ground. Little Dumpling laughed and tried to grab at the moon. Keeping his eyes on the baby, Kegelfarzam said, "They say they do not want to be a reflection of anyone. They want to be totally independent. This may be possible. Personally, I don't think it is. I believe we are all connected. This magic would be fatal for both worlds. We are woven of the same stuff. Jason, you and I and your world and mine. We are like the front and back of a tapestry. Try to separate one side from the other, and you destroy the whole." Lowering Little Dumpling, he tucked him into the crook of his arm and chucked him under the chin, the way Mother and myself like to do. LD gurgled happily and blew a spit bubble. "Besides," said Kegelfarzam, gazing fondly at the baby, "without humans, what would little monsters dream of to frighten them during the day?" Chapter 5. The Price. We came to a giant tree with a door in its trunk. Kegelfarzam told me to stand close to the tree. Then he walked around it in a wide circle, muttering to himself. "You and the prince wait here," he said at last. "Do not cross this line. I must go and clear the way for us. Be careful and speak to no one." I took Little Dumpling's hand and I nodded. Kegelfarzam opened the door, ducked his head, and disappeared into the tree. I was alone in Monsterland. Well, I had Little Dumpling, but he was just a baby, and a monster to boot. So I felt pretty nervous. I got even more nervous when eyes began to appear in the darkness around us. Glowing eyes that hung at all levels, as if the creatures they belonged to stood anywhere from a foot to 12 feet tall. Then a flickering light, not an eye, began approaching us. Soon I could see it came from a torch. When the torchbearer finally came into sight, I was overwhelmed by astonishment and relief. It was my father! My father! "Jason, thank goodness I found you. Come on, bring the baby and we'll go home." Clutching Little Dumpling's hand, I started toward my father. I wondered how he had managed to track us here. I had not taken more than 3 or 4 steps when the door in the tree opened and Kegelfarzam reappeared, shouting, "Jason! What are you doing?" "I'm getting out of here," picking up Little Dumpling and running towards my dad. "Jason, don't cross that line!" yelled Kegelfarzam. I didn't slow down. "Jason, that's not your father!" Now I did slow down. It had to be my father, standing there beneath the tree. It had to be. But then, if it was him, why didn't he come get me instead of just standing there? "Jason, hurry up," said Dad, in his voice most urgent. I took a step forward. "Jason, if you leave this circle, I can't protect you," Kegelfarzam said. I hesitated again. Hurry, Jason, I can't come and get you. He has that ring sealed against me. How do you know that? I asked. I just do. Now hurry. I took a step backwards. Hurry, he snarled. I took another step back. Hurry, darn you! As the words flew out, his face changed, clothes spitting. He exploded into Marzrak, the monster who had been lurking in my closet. It was Mazrak! Oh no! Kegel Farzam grabbed me from behind and dragged me and Little Dumpling through the door into the tree. He waited for me to stop crying before moving on. We walked down a long spiral stair dimly lit by glowing fungus. Mazrak is the chief operative of the enemy, said Kegel Farzam. He wants to keep the prince from returning to your world. Why? Because if Dumpling is in your world, the great unraveling cannot work. The prince acts as a knot, tying our worlds together. That is why he was taken there to begin with. His mother is the wife of King Bork, who leads the faction that wants to split the worlds. She disagreed with her husband and brought the prince to your world to stop the unraveling. It was a dangerous journey, and she undertook it to save both worlds. Alas, she acted hastily and without our help. Though he said nothing more, the tone of his voice made me think that Little Dumpling's mother had not made it back alive. Where are we going now? I asked. You must speak to the Council of Poets, replied Kegel Farzam. Then you must make a choice. We entered a large chamber. It was lit by flickering torches. Twisting roots, some fine as hair, some thicker than my arm. They thrust through the ceiling and the moist earthen walls. Patches of toadstools dotted the floor. In the distance, I could hear a waterfall. Pretty! Hello! Cried Little Dumpling when he saw 6 monsters facing us. They sat in a half circle around a wooden table. At the center of the half circle was an empty chair, large and carved with strange designs. Well, not one of the monsters looked like any of the others. They all had 3 things in common. They were large, they were strange, and they were scary. Welcome back, Kegel Farzam, said the monster farthest to the right, who seemed to be a lady. Congratulations on your safe return. Kegel Farzam nodded to her. Then, after patting both me and Little Dumpling on the head, he walked around the table and took his place in the large chair at the center of the group. Looking me straight in the eyes, he said, Jason Berger, our 2 worlds, the world of humans and the world of monsters, are in terrible danger. Are you willing to try and save them? Me? I squeaked. What can I do? I'm just a kid. You can care for this child who is our hope for the future. I looked at Little Dumpling. He smiled up at me, showing his fangs. As long as he is in your world, then your world and ours will be bound together, and the great unraveling can be prevented. Should he be stolen and brought back here, or should he be perish the thought, then the end will begin. We do not know why his mother brought him to you of all humans. Was it choice, accident, fate? It does not matter. When the moment comes to decide what you will do for your world, the question is not, why me? It is simply, will I do it? Up, up, said Little Dumpling, holding out his arms. I never wanted a little brother, I said, even as I was hoisting him up. Who does? Said the slimy green creature sitting at the far left of the group. It winked at me with eye the size of a baseball. Little brothers can be a terrible annoyance, added the gaunt figure next to him. I could not see this monster's face, for it was hidden by the hood of a long robe. True, said the lady monster at the other end of the table. But then so can first children, and what would happen if parents never bothered to have them either?
All right, I said. I'll take care of him. I kind of like the little guy anyways. Well, what do I have to do? All that you would normally do, said Kegel-Farzam, plus this. You must take this amulet and place it about his neck. He rummaged under his beard for a moment and held out his hand. In the center of his huge blue palm rested a metal disc engraved with a strange design. It was attached to a golden chain. I stared at it. A shiver of fear I did not understand rippled through me. Will you take it? He asked after a moment. Will you place it about his neck? Can't you do it? I asked. My throat was dry again, and my words came out in little more than a whisper. Kegel-Farzam shook his head. It must be the hand of a human that places it about the baby's neck. After setting Little Dumpling on the floor, I stepped forward, and I took the amulet from the hand of the high poet of the land of always October. But as I moved to place it around the baby's neck, Kegel-Farzam said, Wait! Before you do this, you must know one more thing. You must know what it will cost you. I didn't like the sound of that. What do you mean? I asked nervously. No magic comes without a price, said the shaggy, dark-haired creature sitting at Kegel-Farzam's right hand. This, too, is part of the weaving. Kegel-Farzam put his hand on my shoulder. It was heavy. Dumpling displays his true form in your world when the moon is full. Because he is an infant, he cannot control this aspect of himself. At the next full moon, he will once again transform. The energy this transformation releases will reveal his location to the monsters who wish to return him to this world. He paused, then he said, This amulet will collect that transforming energy as it builds throughout the month. I was beginning to have a bad feeling about this. And what happens to that energy when the full moon comes? I asked. On that night, you must take the amulet from Dumpling and place it on your own neck. I think I can guess what will happen, I muttered. Kegel-Farzam nodded. You will become a monster. Won't they find us anyway? For that matter, don't they know where we are already? The answer to your first question is no. Your human aura will mask and mingle with Dumpling's and monster energy, creating a mixture that is confused and less likely to be tracked. As to your second question, he paused, then he spread his huge arms. We are doing our best to find Mazrak. If we can capture him, it is unlikely anyone else will come after you. On this, I can make no promise. Danger is part of the bargain. However, I can promise you of help and protection. Your closet, like most closets and nearly all mirrors, can be a gate between your world and the land of always October. We will guard that gate. We will watch over you. We will always be nearby in case of trouble. I looked at them. I stared at Little Dumpling. I thought of how my life had unraveled when my mother and father divorced. Lifting the chain, I dropped it over the baby's neck. There isn't much more to tell, at least not yet. Once I made my decision, Kegel-Farzam took us down a long tunnel. We stepped into a pool of blue light, and the next thing I knew, we were walking out of my closet into my room. The big monster held Little Dumpling for a moment, and a tear fell from his eye to the baby's forehead. Good night, little prince, he whispered sadly. Good night and goodbye, my grandson. Turning, he stepped into my closet and disappeared. I lifted Little Dumpling, who is now completely human in form, and placed him in the crib. I handed him his rattle and tucked the blanket my mother had just that day finished weaving for him up to his chin. When he was asleep, I went to the window and stared into the darkness. The world out there was stranger, more frightening, far more interesting than I had ever guessed. Suddenly, it also seemed very fragile. Returning to the crib, I folded down the blanket and I touched Little Dumpling's amulet. I would have to do some fast talking to convince my mom to leave it on him. I would be doing a lot of fast talking over the next few years. I lifted the amulet on 2 fingertips. It was light as a feather. Yet once a month, when I hung it around my own neck, it would carry the weight of the world. The weight of 2 worlds, as it were. I went back to the window, thrust my head into the night, and I began to howl at the moon. I figured I might as well start practicing. And that's the end of My Brother is a Monster by Bruce Coville.